and greet again all the conference attendees. Today we start our second conference part, and this part is probably the most unique one within this event, because, as I said during my introduction speech, this is what represents the cultural, identitarian, metapolitical, cultural, historical core of our event, of our program. We heard about concrete achievements of our allies in Western Europe, and this is something which tells us about current dynamic in this direction towards the building of an European Union. But now we would like to hear about the essence, what it is all about, something which we often have no time to think of, because our current time requires all our attention, all our efforts to invest them in the daily political work. Activists present here understand me very well, I'm sure. So it is our big luck that we have here not only intellectuals, not only theorists, authors, but also people who pay attention to the organic whole of our cause, those who return, restore, revive the ancient Greek ideal of the harmony between the internal and external, between spiritual and physical. So you of course guessed whom I mean now. It is Paulin from Sweden, our guest of honor, also well known as the Golden One, now increasingly popular YouTube video blogger, bodybuilder, the author of his own teaching, and it sounds as serious as it is in reality, because he represents his teaching in himself, embodies it, and this is what also shows us one of the best examples of the unity between theoretical and practical, which we also strive to achieve while organizing events like this, and emphasizing that it's not only about some intellectual faraway affairs. It's about here and now, it's about us. But I will not talk too much about it, because I'm sure that he will explain it much better than me. He does it in his video appeals and his analytical videos. We know that there are different levels at which he addresses the audience, I mean Marcus. So today, this is a unique opportunity to cover different angles of this pan-European block of topics. And this will include, of course, recent election in Sweden. It will include the meaning of pan-European nationalism, what all this is about. And, of course, the glorious field, the teaching of the Golden One, and his path, he as a person, his training program, his life. So please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for the invitation. Definitely a pleasure to be here. Now, I haven't slept all too much tonight, so if I am not as high energy, you know why, but I will try to make my best to make this a enlightening experience for you all. So I have quite a few topics I would like to discuss today, including first and foremost the Swedish situation, because I know that you are always interested in how things are in Sweden nowadays. Then also the pan-European situation, pan-European mission question. Then a bit about the Intermarium project, the nationalism of yesteryear, so to speak, chauvinism, etc. And also talking a bit about NATO and Russia, and then lastly a bit about my own journey, both physical and mental, both the awakening process to these political ideas and also a bit about my training, because that's also an integral part of the awakening. So first and foremost, in regards to the Swedish situation, we had an election about a month ago, and it did not quite go as well as we had hoped. So the Sweden Democrats, they started off as a proper nationalist party, a bit rough around the edges, but still had a good heart to them. Now they're more civic nationalists, and that basically means that they don't take the ethnic, the biocultural question into their program, but they're still a step in the right direction, and they polled at 17% in the last election. obviously we'd hoped for more, and we also hoped that Alternative for Sweden would come into the Riksdag, and that threshold is 4%, which they didn't get this election, perhaps next one. And also I might mention this right now because the discussions in the aftermath of the election, both in Sweden and in the broader West, has been, is the solution political, etc. And I would answer to that. The solution is, it's like a hydra. You have different heads. One solution is political, the other is cultural, the other is social. So many different venues that we need to expand upon, and the political arena is one of them. So even though the be all and end all, the solution at hand isn't political, parts of it is political. But anyway, the thing with Sweden also is that the Sweden Democrats, who got over 1 million of the votes in Sweden, they have since their beginning been demonized constantly in the media, and saying that you've been Sweden Democrats have been the same as saying that you are a heretic 300 years ago. So an enormous social stigma against saying that you belong to these people who by the establishment have been pointed out as downright evil. And despite all of this indoctrination, this harsh media campaigns, they still got a solid enough result. And then obviously next election they will probably get a few more percent, and the election after that probably more. But as I said, the political scenario isn't the only thing that's important. In the wake of them going forward, our metapolitical work is also helped by that, and as Sweden continues to decline, more people are waking up. Which leads me to the next question at hand. Is it all that bad? That's also a question you hear quite often from foreigners, that perhaps they don't know what's going on in Sweden. Perhaps they hear only about certain individuals saying that Sweden is this close to civil war, or that everything is collapsing. Now, the truth is that Sweden is still a very good country. Sweden is still quite stable and prosperous. So the point where civil unrest become a factor, we're still quite far away from that, because most people still live in quite a luxury, to be honest. So the point is that Sweden is heading towards a cliff. We're not there yet, but we're going high speed towards a cliff, and when that point happens, then we can talk about civil unrest, etc. But that point is still too far off. And also, if you compare Sweden the way it was 30 years ago, it's a completely different nation. So we went from really good to somewhat good today, and if it continues, yes, then we'll be in a very bad situation. And that's also why now is the perfect opportunity to start networking with others, both inside of Sweden and then also in Europe in a broader sense, so that we have good networks in Ukraine, for example. No matter what happens, it's always good to have these networks throughout Europe or throughout all of the West, including Americas and Australia, etc. So the Swedish situation is getting worse, but it's not that bad that people are out in the street, as we've seen in other nations. So we have two issues facing Sweden. Obviously, mass immigration, as you all know. We've taken in very many migrants over the last 20 years, and demographically speaking, Sweden is changing. Now, Swedes are still in the majority of the population, but we're heading towards yet another disaster that way. The second problem, which might be perhaps an even bigger problem, is the loss and lack of identity. And what I mean by that is, if you have a tree, you cut its roots, it can't grow back. And if you have people who are not identifying themselves as Swedish, they're identifying themselves as something completely else. They identify as the globalist monoculture, where they can buy an identity and they don't really have any roots. And therefore, if you say to them, you know what, Sweden will cease existing, Europe will cease existing, they will say, why would I care about that? I am a citizen of the world. As long as I can have my alcohol and porn and drugs and all these distractions. So that is a very hard question to reach, because as long as we have this sort of luxurious society still, it's quite easy for these people to take that road. Why would I care about the fate of Sweden or the West if I don't even feel part of it? So that is a huge issue in the salvation of both Sweden and in Europe and the West in general, the revival of our identity. And obviously history comes into a large role in here. And that leads me to the second point, which is the pan-European situation. So if you ask, is Sweden unique in what is going on there? I would say that many Western nations are the worst at something. So we can take Sweden, for example. We are the worst when it comes to feminism. Feminism and gender equality is really far gone in Sweden. So we have a lot of crazy ideas. So you might hear that, Swedish experiments, etc., and the destabilization of the nuclear family. That's also a hard question that we have to deal with. And also, speaking of this, the attack on masculinity has gone quite far in Sweden as well, which is why we need a revival of that masculine spirit, but I'll get into that in a bit. But then you have the United States, the epicenter of degeneracy. They have a lot of problems, a lot of bad things are emanating from there, but on the positive side you also have a lot of good things from America. Trump is definitely a better candidate than Hillary Clinton, to give an example. France have come quite far with their demographic replacement, but Marine Le Pen is going somewhat well. So there's good and bad in many countries. Great Britain, same thing, quite tyrannical state. You can be put in prison for even the slightest wrong thing. But then again, there's a lot of British guys out in the street as well, protesting against Islamic rape gangs, etc. And Germany, a lot of white guilt, a lot of guilt since Second World War, but also a lot of good initiatives from Germany, as we've seen in Chemnitz, for example. And then lastly, Greece, completely run over by the bankers. But then Golden Dawn presents a perfect role model for other nationalists to emulate. So the point here is that all of these examples you have in basically all European nations. So yes, we have a banking problem in the United States of America, if we look at the banking crisis of 2008. In Great Britain, we have also a problem of demographic replacement, same thing in Sweden. So we all share common problems, it's just that in certain nations they're more pronounced than others. So the Swedish situation is more pronounced with rampant feminism, etc. And in Great Britain, the problem with censorship is more apparent. But we all share the same sort of issues. And the situation, the plan of the enemy, so to speak, is the same no matter what country we're talking about. So the plan is the same for Germany as it is for Sweden, and that is to replace the bioculture. It's to replace Europe's native population. So that is something that we must keep in mind at all times when we discuss Europe and the West, that the plan is the same no matter if you are from Greece or Ireland. It's the same, it's to replace your population with people from majority Middle East and Africa. And this leads me to my next question, and that is the one of ancient rivalries and chauvinism. Now obviously, understanding European history, we know we have had a lot of brutal and bloody wars between each other. And this is obviously something that can be approached in two different ways. You can take the conflict between England and Ireland, it goes back 800 years. If Irish identitarians can draw strength from the fortitude shown by their ancestors, then that is perfect. That is a good aspect of these ancient rivalries, if that can increase your sense of identity. However, if we allow that to go too far and we start bickering amongst each other and harbor resentments against each other going forward, then our enemies' work will be much easier for them, because, as I said, they view Europe as one entity. The same plan applies for everyone. And you can take another example, an ancient rivalry between Denmark and Sweden. Most people don't even know the difference between Denmark and Sweden, and there isn't all too much difference either. And that's the point, that even though we've had many bloody wars with each other, and that we still have half of Denmark, the original Denmark, which is Scania. Point being that today it doesn't matter, because we're all in the same boat. Same thing with Poland and Germany. Obviously bloody history between them, but now you can see that Germany is already underway with the replacement. You have a lot of bad policies there. Poland, the enemy, they want Poland to go the exact same way. So, same situation, and we can definitely benefit from cooperation between the nations, despite the history, because if we're looking towards the future, we can either cooperate and have Europe, or we can not cooperate and be in a much worse situation. So, next point, and that's to my own enlightenment process. And something I've identified, as I said previously, is the lack of identity, the lack of a historic perspective for most people. So if you say to a regular citizen of France or Sweden or Germany or Great Britain, and you say, your nation will not endure for another 50 years, and he will then say, okay, but I don't care. The remedy to this is obviously to instill in him a sense of history, a sense of belonging to a historic nation that's been there for many centuries. So if you say to him, you know what, you are a chain that has been going on for millennia in this particular land. Your forefathers have worked and fought for this land, and now it's up to you to continue this and put this into a historical perspective instead of the perspective that he has today, that he only looks at the world as it is right now, his everyday life, the next instant gratification, what he will eat as dinner today, or how drunk he will get the next weekend, or what kind of drugs he will take next weekend. We need to change that perspective. And that's also the hyper-individualist question, as I would like to call it. And in regards to my own enlightenment, I was quite individualistic in my youth as well. The remedy for this was a year in the Swedish army. We had the old system where each man got into the army, got to serve for a year, and then you had a standing order if usually Soviet would attack or something. It looks a bit different nowadays, but that was the key. And I would say that this is a very good remedy for this hyper-individualism, that you are being put in a context where you are not unique, you are not special, you are just supposed to subject yourself to the hierarchy and follow orders. And this is good for a young man, because a young man doesn't need a ton of options to do. He needs some firm advice, and then when he's older, when he is 28 instead of 18, then he can start making some decisions of his own. But it's very good for him to get into that, and by losing these institutions such as the army, so today not many Swedish lads go to the army even, they lose that sense, and they continue along the path of hyper-individualism. Now obviously there are options to the army as well. Talked with my good friend Dennis, wherever he is, with the black guy, about football firms, etc. That can be seen as a type of organization where you come in, take a responsibility towards others, give everything for the group. So there are organizational things you can do outside of the army as well, which can then combat this hyper-individualism. And obviously goes the same way with different nationalist organizations. And also, speaking about my own training and my own philosophy there, it is my sincere belief that a healthy mind exists in a healthy body. And it's also the fact of, if we are to win the hearts and minds of the population, the better aesthetics we have, the better able we will be to attract people to our way of thinking. So if they see a good, well-represented gentleman who carries himself well, people will be more inclined to listen to him. And then also the health aspect, or you will have more energy, etc. if you're well trained. And we also come into the aspect of physical violence. If you are a political dissident in most nations, it can be very good to learn how to defend yourself, because it's not always a combat of words and arguments. Sometimes the fist will fly, and then it's important for you to be able to stand up for yourself, or to be able to stand up for your comrades. And also in Western Europe and in Americas, we have a rapidly deteriorating situation on the street, so to speak. So being able to defend a woman that is being harassed by a migrant can also be a good idea. So training aspect very important, and it also builds the character to train hard and to train a lot. So last point, just a few notes on NATO and Russia and the Intermarium projects. So the main thing here is to take our own side, because we've had this argument as well in Sweden. Okay, we have Putin here, we have NATO and EU there, so we have to choose, but we don't really have to choose. If we can build a bloc of Eastern and Central European nations that are strong in their own right, who reject Russian imperialism and who reject neoliberalism emanating from EU and NATO, then we'll be in a much better position. So I am all for the Intermarium idea. I'm all for a closer cooperation between the states of Eastern Europe. It's my sincere hope that many of the ancient rivalries can be put aside and look towards the future, because right now Poland and Hungary, they are holding up quite well against the EU, and the more people who can join them, the better. If we had a bloc consisting of more nations who are saying the same thing and rejecting EU, they're strengthening numbers, and that applies both against the EU and against Russia. So it's an absolutely brilliant idea, Intermarium, and I will definitely keep my eyes open for that, and I hope for the best in that particular endeavor. Thank you.